Today on the show, we have with us Smokey the Bera, co-founder of Berachain. Welcome to the show, Smokey.
Hey man, how's it going? Good to meet.
Awesome. Yeah,
Good to
good to
be here.
meet you finally, and really happy to have you here to learn a bit about Berachain. So to start, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved with Berachain and how you came to be in crypto?
Yeah, for sure. So quick context here. Started my career on the complete opposite side of things. I was funnily enough in like healthcare, pharmaceuticals for the most part. Have been building and scaling companies in that sector for the vast majority of my early half of my career. So spent some time out in the valley. Did the whole thing, raised and exited the company, all that kind of fun stuff. And then ended up working in VC for a while after that, and raising and deploying capital with my current co-founder Papa. The thing is, actually, one of my first investors in my first company was fairly senior at the Youth Foundation, and I also just think that when you're in the Bay Area and early mid 2010s, and you see enough people moving in a certain direction, you sort of have to question your own sanity if you don't pay attention to what's going on there. So I think that I found that a lot of my friends were starting to dive deeper and deeper into the space. And with that, just ended up dabbling. So for the most part, buying like Bitcoin and ETH, and between 2014 and 2016, I'd say for the most in 2015, really. And then just keeping a pulse on things over the next little while. So very much played the 2017-18 shitcoin cycle. Made a bunch of money, lost a bunch of money, all the good stuff. Excuse me. And then just sort of like dove in, I'd say full force, more in 2019, 2020. So DeFi summer was a great time, and then paid a lot more attention throughout, 2021 and 22, as we started seeing, I'd say, like more advanced forms of DeFi coming to light. Had a lot of fun, I'd say, in sort of like that second rotation, if you will, as you saw the Fraxes, the Ohms, the Raris, like the Alchemixes, these sorts of groups really getting off the ground and getting their sea legs. And it was around that time that we started working on Berachain very much by accident, in that I think that in mid 2021 was when we started seeing a lot more of these NFTs that were not just like shitty 10K profile picture collections, and we actually just like had some element of ownership, or greater utility, or just something beyond the art involved there. The one that did it for myself and Papa was, we thought the parallel TCG universe, it's now like Prime and so on and so forth, was really cool, just conceptually, right? It was actually also built by some guys from Toronto who we had some network overlap with. We thought the idea of Magic the Gathering / Hearthstone on chain was kind of funky, and we were like, hey, like, what if we also made an NFT project? Ironically, a kind of useless, like, bunch of 100 PFP thing, for shits and gigs, like nothing more, nothing less. And that's how the idea of like the bong bears that spawned the NFT collections that in turn rebased their way into Berachain, all came to be. So really started completely as a joke. Then we ended up building this NFT community, but really sourcing those initial users from, I'd say, DeFi and highly crypto native discords, as opposed to perhaps your average NFT crowd to start. And then finding sort of like more, I guess, spicy, mechanisms to actually make that more interesting than your standard NFT project, having them multiply over time, having them, quote unquote, rebase in terms of the way that the supply expanded, and original owners were rewarded over time. And then, over time, I think we actually just like talked to the community. We talked to the people who we had ended up, building with or building alongside in this NFT community, who were disproportionately DeFi minded, and just tried to better understand the problems that they were facing, or the things that they thought were interesting and worth solving in an on-chain environment. And then that's sort of how the idea of Berachain and proof of liquidity came to be. I think it was really just a lot of serendipity, and a lot of, like, let's say, user first and developer first investigation by accident.
Really cool, and definitely want to unpack some of those things a little more. So first, you mentioned proof of liquidity. Can you go through high level what that is for people who have never heard that term before?
Yeah, for sure. So proof of liquidity is Berachain's consensus, or more accurately Sybil resistance mechanism. It's really just how block rewards and how effectively incentives are distributed on Berachain. So in a traditional proof of stake network, ETH, AVAX, whatever it might be, you buy a whole bunch of the staking token, you stake it, you run a validator, you win blocks whenever your validator proposes a block, etc. And you get that block reward, right? What that leaves you with, however, is a little bit of a weird dichotomy, in that the capital that you've chosen to allocate towards a validator is inherently, taking away in some manner from capital that could exist in an on-chain environment. So you're effectively given a choice between network security and contributing to the ETH validator set, et cetera, and network liquidity, right? So LPing in a DEX, providing liquidity in the lending market, so on and so forth. And as we see it, liquidity really is what makes chains and DeFi go round. And this just seemed like a very odd or nonsensical, I guess, proposition to us. Like, why is it that by doing A, which is a fundamental good, you have to sacrifice B, which is also a fundamental good? So the whole idea of proof liquidity is to allow a chain to effectively uniformly scale liquidity and security as it grows. The way that works for us is that the only way to earn block rewards and the only way to really build blocks with rewards on Berachain is by doing the work of actually providing liquidity in the first place. So the way this works is that Berachain actually has two tokens at the core of the whole operation. There's one called BGT, or the Bera Governance Token, which is illiquid and non-transferable. So it cannot just be purchased on Binance or on Uniswap, etc. You actually have to earn it by providing liquidity to a set of different DeFi primitives that are built into the chain to start. With that, there's like a relatively simple DEX, there's a perps vault, there's a stablecoin lending market, etc., that are meant to just be those base plates that allow people to safely and easily provide liquidity and these like effectively DeFi Legos out the gates. And that's what can actually be used to build the initial supply of this BGT. I can get a little bit more into the mechanisms of BGT and how that works over time and how it influences block rewards and the role of validators, etc. But the other important thing to know here is that BGT can at any point in time be one-way burned into Bera, the gas token and the liquid token of the ecosystem. That's the one that you'll have liquid pairs against. That's the one that will potentially be listed on exchanges, all that kind of stuff. So the real idea of proof of liquidity is that the only way to earn rewards or the only way to scale the security, i.e. the staking token of the ecosystem, BGT, is by first doing the work of providing liquidity. So the goal really is to allow users to, if you want to say it in a kind of corny way, like, have your stake and eat it too, right? Make that liquidity maximally productive and allow it to do as much as possible in that on-chain environment.
Got it. And so, first follow-up question is, what's the advantage of proof of liquidity over liquid staking?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the way that we think about it is that proof liquidity is very much implemented on like a native network level, right? I think LSTs and Eigenlayer very much like move this concept of making one's capital more efficient, in the right direction. However, the second part of proof of liquidity, which I didn't touch on quite as much, is that it's actually the first time that we see a protocol, natively able to help power the applications that are built on top of it. So the way that BGT is distributed across the network is actually not just via like a programmatic manner or via just like us saying, okay, here are the 5 buttons to press. It's actually done in an entirely decentralized manner by the validator set. So the validators on Berachain actually each have a set of gauges. So think like curve style, if you will. And based on their BGT weights, they're able to say, I want to allocate X amount of my block rewards when I win a block to pool A versus pool B versus pool C. And while the initial destinations that can be, used as BGT generation or emission sources are only those like native dApps that I mentioned, i.e. the DEX, the lending market, the perps, over time that can actually extend to any application on the chain, which is where I think it gets incredibly exciting and perhaps allows you to go beyond of what you can just accomplish via liquid staking. The other thing I'd add here is that proof of liquidity is generalizable to really any asset, right? So not just an asset that can be staked, but you could very much have a delta neutral vault that's carrying out some strategy. Perhaps it's a cash and carry trade or basis trade, whatever it might be. And in exchange for actually users depositing in that vault, they could actually be generating BGT and in turn contributing towards network security.
Wow. So, am I understanding correctly that it's almost like curve wars, but at the scale of the entire chain rather than just a
You
single DEX?
You've got it. I think about it a little bit as like, curvification of anything within the ecosystem, which is to say, like, yes, you can totally point emissions towards the pools and the decks, but you could point those emissions towards, an NFT marketplace and subsidizing, fees there, right? You could point those emissions towards a yield swaps protocol, right? I think that, and I actually think the more interesting design space comes, to start within DeFi, of course, and, using things that can really accelerate the velocity of capital per se. But on the other hand, actually just finding ways that can be embedded into GameFi, into SocialFi, into all the other weird shit that doesn't necessarily just think about liquidity to start, but could use it as a form of activation energy or a form of constant incentivization, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, we're very excited about the prospects of what could eventually be built with POL.
Yeah, definitely, definitely interesting. So you mentioned other applications launching. What is the Berachain ecosystem looking like so far?
Yeah, dude, the Berachain ecosystem has been a pleasure to watch, flourish, I suppose. In that, I think I can very confidently say that at this point, if there is a DeFi primitive or a weirder thing that has not been seen before, which is honestly what I'm more excited about. It exists on Bera. And in many cases, these guys are building very collaboratively and trying to figure out how to actually have as many of their applications plug into proof of liquidity as possible and sort of benefit from that system that's really built into the chain. So when I think about some of the things that are most exciting, I think about concepts like exponents, which I think are super cool. If you might have seen those guys cracking around before, it's effectively allowing you to use inverse bonding curves to build, linear or power perps on any long tail asset, or put more simply, leverage on shitcoins, which I think is one of the greatest sources of product market fit within DeFi. There's groups who are building credit default swaps and effectively like almost distressed debt markets on chain, which I think is incredibly interesting. There's an entire other layer around Berachain's validator logic, which allows certain protocols to effectively incentivize emissions towards their own pool via using what's commonly known within the curve, et cetera, ecosystem as bribes to say, hey, I'm going to give you X amount of token in exchange for Y amount of emissions. And I actually think that a lot of the things that can be built around that, whether that's protocols borrowing against future emissions, yield swaps around that kind of thing, et cetera, can be very interesting. Um, so I think that when I answer the question most directly, the ecosystem is expansive and is checking pretty much every box I can think of, whether that be DePIN, NFTFi, exciting new games, super spicy new DeFi stuff. I'd like to see a little bit more happen in some of the areas that I think we're just more cautiously exploring right now, just because we're not 100% convinced of some of the products in the space yet. So I think there's still more to be seen on the AI side. I think there's still more to be seen on some of the social fi side, where I just think that you need truly breakout ideas. But beyond that, when you look at any sort of primitive or anything that you'd expect in a new eco, there's probably a few variants of it and a few cool new ones that'll be there from day one.
Wow, that's cool to hear. And so what's the tech behind Berachain?
Yeah, so Berachain's built on using our own implementation of EVM on Cosmos, or really effectively EVM in a box, which allows you to plug in a number of different consensus engines. But we've currently optimized for Cosmos slash Tendermint consensus. And it's entirely home rolled. We actually first released our version of this called Polaris about a year ago, around ETH Denver last year. And actually, within the next few weeks, we're going to be updating this and releasing what we call Beacon Kit, which is a much more scalable version that's a little bit more ETH-like, even down to the staking logic, which allows for effectively full EIP, compatibility and effectively an EVM identical environment that follows the ETH2 spec, which we just think is incredibly interesting as more of these EIP solutions come out down the road, that we can use to effectively scale our stack. And beyond this, something that allows us to, I think, very easily segue into what the scaling Berachain world looks like, where we have L2s and other groups that are actually building beyond the base layer. So yeah, in short, fully EVM equivalent slash EVM compatible environment. If you can deploy a contract on mainnet, you can deploy it on Berachain. We've got most of the, I'd say, relevant infrastructure there out the gates, whether that be oracles, bridging solutions, everything in between. And in the meantime, I think we're just focused on making sure that the user and developer experience is as seamless as possible. But yeah, everything has been home rolled, and we're excited to see where it goes.
Cool, awesome. And what's the plan to get that initial liquidity on the chain? Is it these chain level Bera incentives or BGT
Yeah,
incentives?
I think that the BGT incentives slash because they're coming from inflation, right? So I think they certainly help get the ball rolling in the right direction, and they're certainly the most baseline source of TVL. I think that we're seeing a number of protocols who are interested in actually bringing over their deposits slash TVL slash treasury to use Berachain as a settlement or a base layer. I think we're also fortunate to raise a fair bit of venture capital along the way. And with that, as we look at funds and liquid funds, prop shops, high net worth individuals, et cetera, who already have skin in the game or a vested interest in Berachain, there's a number of these groups who are also fairly meaningful players within other DeFi or on-chain ecosystems who want to be able to contribute liquidity, who want to be able to farm the token, and who want to be able to play a meaningful role in governance over time, right? Because I think the thing to keep in mind is that on Berachain, more than anything else, those who provide liquidity in one form or the other, I'd say, have the greatest form of control over the network's incentives over time, right? So you really can have a compounding advantage if you're there early on. You LP the pools that you're comfortable with from a risk point of view, and you use that to really sort of help accelerate or compound interest on the pools that you want to continue using in the future. So I think that there's a sort of natural set of equations that are optimized for these groups to come over. But I also say that as the foundation team slash as the the ecosystem team as a whole, we regularly talk to folks folks who are, trying to find ways to launch breakout new applications on Berachain that we think really should be the way that a chain grows most organically. So not just via the native dApps that we build, those are meant to really be obsoleted over time, but more via like finding the next GMXs, finding the next groups that we think can really be effectively those like shelling points for an ecosystem. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, but on one hand, the venture capital side, on the other hand, treasuries, protocols, on the third hand, finding these nodes within our network that we believe will be just massive attractions for TVL over time, and convincing as many of them as possible that they should be building on Bera.
Awesome. Awesome. I like that you mentioned the leverage and perp taxes, because one of the things I talk about a lot on the channel is if you look at the top protocols by fees, those are just consistently some of the best money makers in DeFi.
Yeah, you've got it, man. I think they tend to be, quite profitable, and the other part of it is that part of the value of BGT is that BGT actually ends up earning fees or some portion of fees from all the different applications that it's powering, right? That way it's not just effectively a subsidy token, right? So some portion of the perps vault, some portion of like swap fees in the DEX, et cetera, are going towards BGT stakers such that they're actually, they have a reason to hold the token. And hopefully, a number of these different products end up, allowing that to turn into one that makes sense to hold over a long period of time from that, profitability as mentioned.
Cool. All right. So looking forward a little, what can you share about what's next for Berachain?
Yeah, good question, man. I think as mentioned, we'll be shipping Beacon Kit relatively soon, and effectively our second version of Polaris, if you will, and that'll come alongside the V2 of our testnet, which would be quite exciting. I think that's really the nearest term thing. We'll give that a little bit of time to settle. We'll give that some time to be fully battle tested, because transparently, our first testnet just we found that with the sheer number of users that we had on board, and some of the limitations that we had with Comet BFT and effectively the architecture of V1, we really were like running into issues just from a scaling point of view. We didn't expect to see like the number of users on a Cosmos chain, since like Terra blew up, but we saw that pretty early, especially as I'm sure with some of the bot farmers flooding in among others. And we wanted to make sure that what we build next really does stand the test of time and scale, especially as we think about the hundreds of applications and a number of L2s, et cetera, that will be rolling up to us and building on us and dependent on us. So I guess the two things that I would think about most are one, ensuring that the VM is super strong and super stable, and just battle testing the living fuck out of that, and that'll happen pretty soon. And then two will be actually seeing some of the groups that want to build derivative solutions on top of that, and seeing all the applications in the ecosystem that can really push it to its limits, as I see. And then after that, at some point, will be mainnet. So I think those are the main ones in the future, man.
Awesome. Things to look forward to. Yeah, I'll add a quick anecdote because I get requests in the comments to make videos a lot, and so I had people requesting like, "Oh, talk about Berachain Testnet," and I can think of one comment specifically where the person, was like, "Oh, I can't figure out Berachain Testnet. Can you make a guide?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's pretty similar to any other chain you use DeFi on. You just have to add the testnet and you have to get money from a
Yeah.
faucet instead of bridging it." And he goes, "I've never used DeFi before."
Ah, fuck. Yeah, that can hurt.
Um, but yeah, so that doesn't shock me.
And you know what, the part that was actually nice that we found, just like anecdata wise, actually, it was on another podcast I learned this, was that like part of the, if you look at the Berachain website and stuff, right? There's actually like a big golden button in the middle, effectively, that'll show the DApps that are directly linked from the foundation page, effectively,
Mhm.
because those DApps are built into the chain to start, right? So what we did find was nice was that people weren't like intimidated by the site, the tech, etc. It sort of felt friendly, collegial. There's a bunch of bears doing shit, like cool. And also that the applications that they needed to use are sort of right there, right? So you could go hit the faucet and then it'll immediately show you how to go to the DEX or the perps, etc. So I hope that in the future we'll also be able to make that user experience even smoother for someone like that person in your comments over time.
Absolutely, and I think this person was able to get it sorted out. I referred them to a sort of
Good,
introduction
good.
to DeFi guide I had, and then I think they were able to sort it out. Uh, Next question would be, so for viewers who they love what they hear, they want to get involved in Berachain ecosystem today, what can they do?
Yeah, good question, man. I think that, one thing is definitely poke around in the testnet. I would almost advise them to wait a little bit because I think that the testnet V2 that we ship should hopefully have a meaningfully superior user experience. And then I'd also say just like try to learn about the projects in the ecosystem. There's a lot of folks on the team, including myself, that do our best to help highlight some of the cool, folks that are building things. So there's Cami, who recently joined our DevRel team to lead, developer evangelism on Berachain. Her Twitter's like Cami in this thing or something like that. There's Nowhere of Markets, who was actually famously perhaps known back in the day for writing about the curve wars, who's helped to highlight some of the groups in the ecosystem and how they work together. There's some of our DevRels, like, Barry the Cucumber or Larry the Cucumber, Coding with Manny, D the Bera, etc., who all put out content on this sort of stuff. So I think it's great to just be able to dive in a little bit and see what people are building. So yeah, man, I think that's probably how I'd advise people to poke around for now.
Awesome. Yeah, I just learned today that Nowhere Markets was writing Berachain content now because I've been a fan of his or her work for a while, and uh, yeah, I just coincidentally a few hours ago I saw that.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, Noah's awesome. He's been great to work with, and a welcome addition to the team because we've actually known him for a couple of years, since the early days of his writing. So, always good to be able to come full circle on that kind of stuff.
Very nice. So final questions. First, besides Berachain or other projects you're involved with, what's the most interesting thing you've seen in crypto recently?
Oh fuck, that's a good question. I have to think on that one a little bit more, but I think that I am personally, I don't know. I keep on I keep on coming back right now to exponents, mostly just because I see it as just like such a source of PMF if it actually works. And I think that last part's always important because like shit doesn't work in many cases. But just one of the most exciting things to me is the concept of being able to go stupid long on a shitcoin before someone like lists it on Bybit or Binance or whatever it might be. Um, I'm not even like in the trenches myself nowadays. It's been quite a while since I was a active shitcoiner, which I love and hate. It's like you see your friends catching these ridiculous multiples, and you're like, well, fuck, I have to respond to this Telegram message. But I actually think it's kind of healthy too, so we don't have to, live in the weird back and forth of that. Um, but I think that like when we think about what people have used crypto for better or for worse the most nowadays, um, it's been rampant speculation on early stage assets. Like look at the whole pump fund craze, look at Fantasy Top, etc. And I imagine that something like Exponents could absolutely turbocharge the shit out of that. So I'm pretty excited for what those guys cook up. There's also a couple others that are just like weirder and hilarious. Again, I'm biased living in the Berachain ecosystem that I've gotten to see. So like there's one called Puff Paw, which I just think is absolutely hilarious. It's deep in smoking, quit smoking to earn. Um, it's actually vape to earn, which I think is like even funnier.
They
And
earn.
and they have like it's actually really it's a team that's like shipped nearly 100 million vapes in the past. In traditional settings, and they actually build a system to systematically, disincentivize people to, like use lower and lower nicotine settings over time, in order to receive more like vape rewards per se. Which is like on one hand like kind of cool, certainly gameable in some ways, certainly hilarious, and hopefully does not end up as a health scandal, and hopefully is used responsibly. But I just think those kinds of concepts, are just hilarious and cool and interesting if done right.
Oh, that is hilarious. I want a Zin to earn.
Right,
Um,
like, yeah, we talked about this one, like, would be, like, fake to earn, Zin to win, and then, like, smoke to what? We're not quite sure, right? There's gotta be some highly cursed flywheel.
that is hilarious. So I feels weird asking a serious question after that, but second to last question is, what advice would you give someone looking to get a job in crypto?
Oh my god, that's a good question, man. I think the biggest thing is, like, there are 2 things that I see a lot. People think that, like, the way to win, or to get a job or to be employable in the space is by showing that you can, run this playbook that's been run before, and I think that that's inherently the wrong approach. I think that the biggest thing that you can do to show that you're actually capable, is, like, demonstrate a degree of creativity, which I don't think this is, like, an incredibly hot take. I just think that it's very like, rarely seen, right? And also a degree of diligence, right? When I walk into an interview with a candidate and they have, done the reading, they have listened to past podcasts, whatever it is. Like it's evident that there's actually been a degree of effort and prep. That's awesome. But I'd wager that like between 20 and 50% of candidates, don't do like sorry, I think 20% of candidates maybe do this at best. Um, so I think that like the bar is relatively low there on one hand, and on the other hand, I think it's really important to be able to value the ability to like think on one's feet, um, and to actually turn around an answer or like a funky solution to something that isn't incredibly prescriptive very quickly. So I think developing that like fast reflex muscle, if you will, becomes incredibly important in this space because a it moves ridiculously quickly, and b I think we've seen many cases where people just run the same bullshit over and over 10 times and expect it to work better or to continue working to the same degree of efficacy as the first iteration, right? It's part of this is part of the reason that I'm not incredibly bullish on a lot of points programs. I think that they are functional and I think they're a great tool objectively. I think that they certainly have their issues and I am less than bullish on their longevity for that reason.
Interesting. No, that's a great perspective. So final question is, where can people follow you or Berachain?
Yeah, best case to catch me is often on Twitter. Just Smokey the Bera on Twitter, and myself and a lot of my team members are pretty responsive on there, and do our best to help solve any problems, get in front of builders, meet cool people, everything in between.
Awesome, thank you. And I can vouch you responded to my cold DM, so
Oh,
so
sweet.
you are indeed responsive. Thanks so much for
Glad
coming
to
on the
help.
show. It's really been a pleasure.
Awesome,
And
man. Wonderful chatting.